Hello guys, welcome to my channel where stories filled with revenge, moral lessons, and love are told. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you won't miss the next gripping story. I never thought I'd live to see the day my own flesh and blood would turn against me. My name is Robert Thompson, and I'm 75 years old. I've lived most of my life in the same modest but beautiful Cleveland home, a place filled with the scent of fresh coffee in the mornings and the echo of my late wife Eleanor's laughter. Every corner carries a memory, and every memory is a piece of my soul. That's why, when my daughter Emily Hartman and her husband Mark started talking about me selling the place, my gut clenched. I could see it in Mark's eyes, those cold, calculating eyes that never really smiled even when his mouth did. It started small, the way most betrayals do. Emily called one evening, her voice sweet but edged with urgency. "Dad, Mark's found this amazing place for you in Florida. Sunshine all year round, professional medical care, great community. You'll love it." She sounded convinced, but there was something rehearsed in her tone, like she'd been coached. I asked what brought this on. She hesitated before saying, "We just want you to be comfortable, you know? And this house, it's a lot for you to handle alone." Mark took over the conversation, his deep, slick voice pushing through the phone. "Robert, you've worked hard your whole life. You deserve the best. We can get a great price for your house now. It's worth over $1 million and invest the money in something that will grow for you and for Emily. Win-win." I could almost hear him grinning through the receiver, that sales pitch voice he probably used to charm investors on Wall Street. I told them I wasn't interested. The silence on the line was heavy, but then Mark chuckled lightly. "Well, we'll talk about it in person. I think you'll change your mind." It wasn't a suggestion, it was a warning dressed as friendly advice. A week later, they showed up at my door. Emily hugged me tightly, but her perfume was unfamiliar, sharp, almost metallic. Mark's handshake was firm, almost crushing, and he scanned my living room like he was already measuring it for resale. They came bearing gifts, gourmet coffee beans, a silk scarf for me to remember Emily by when she's not around. But the conversation quickly turned back to Florida. Mark pulled out glossy brochures of a luxury assisted living community. The photos showed palm trees, smiling seniors playing golf, and a sparkling swimming pool. "This is where you could be, Robert. No more shoveling snow, no more worrying about the roof or the pipes. And the best part? They handle everything for you." He slid the papers across the table toward me like a dealer passing cards. I looked at Emily, searching for a trace of my little girl, the one who used to curl up next to me on the couch when thunderstorms scared her. But her eyes darted away. "Dad, please. This is for your own good." It was the first time I noticed how much she avoided looking directly at me. It stung. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the bitter taste steady me. "I appreciate the thought," I said evenly, "but I'm not selling my home." Mark leaned back, his smile tightening. "Robert, this isn't just about you. We're talking about securing a future for Emily too. You don't want to leave her with nothing, do you?" The words were dressed in concern, but I heard the steel underneath. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. I thought about Mrs. Clara Hughes, my neighbor, who'd once told me she'd seen strangers lingering near my property when I was out. At the time, I'd brushed it off. But now, Mark's pushiness made me reconsider. The following week, the pressure intensified. Emily started visiting more often, bringing me dinner, cleaning the kitchen, folding laundry I hadn't asked her to touch. It should have been comforting, but every action felt like it had an ulterior motive. Then came the documents. One evening, she slid a stack of papers across the table. "Dad, Mark just needs your signature here and here. It's just for the Florida place holding your spot." I picked up the top sheet and my stomach tightened. The words "power of attorney" jumped out at me. I looked up sharply. "Emily, what is this?" She stammered something about making things easier and avoiding legal hassles, but I could see the panic flicker across her face. Mark wasn't there that night, but I could feel his fingerprints all over the plan. I told Emily to take the papers back, that I needed time to think. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Dad, you're making this harder than it has to be. Later that week, I got a call from the bank. A man named Officer Daniel Ortiz, the security liaison there, informed me that someone had inquired about accessing my accounts with a copy of my ID. The copy was clearly a fake photo, but not my signature. He said they'd flagged the attempt and thought I should know. My chest tightened. I knew then that this wasn't just about my house, they wanted everything. That night, as the wind rattled the windows, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm tea. I pulled out my old address book and flipped to a number I hadn't dialed in years, Jack Reed, an old acquaintance who'd gone into private investigation after leaving the police force. I explained the situation, my voice low, my words careful. He listened without interrupting, then said, "Robert, you're dealing with professionals. They know how to make this look legitimate. You need to get ahead of them before they close the trap." Jack came by the next day, a tall man in a dark coat with eyes that missed nothing. He installed discrete cameras in my home, ones that blended into the corners of the rooms. He advised me to stop leaving the house unlocked, even for quick trips, and to document every interaction I had with Emily and Mark. "They're counting on your trust, Robert. Don't give them an inch." For the next 2 weeks, I played the role of the aging, slightly confused father. I let them believe I was warming to the idea of Florida. I nodded at Mark's stories about guaranteed returns and exclusive investment opportunities. I even pretended to flip through his brochures with interest. But inside, I was sharpening my resolve. One afternoon, Emily arrived alone, carrying a cake from my favorite bakery. She smiled nervously, then handed me another set of documents. "Dad, we really need to get this signed before the end of the month. Mark's under a lot of pressure to finalize things." I took the papers and said I'd look them over after tea. When she excused herself to use the bathroom, I slipped the top sheet into an envelope I'd prepared for Jack. Later, Jack confirmed my suspicions it was a forged transfer of property deed, signing my home over to Mark and Emily jointly. That night, I sat in my recliner, Buddy's absence from my life still a quiet ache I hadn't yet filled, and thought about Eleanor. She'd have told me to fight. She always said, "Robert, never let anyone write the end of your story for you." And I decided, then and there, that I wouldn't. I woke the next morning with a different kind of determination, a quiet steel in my spine. Jack had called late the night before, his voice a shade darker than usual. "Robert, it's worse than we thought," he'd said. "Mark's not just after your house. He's running a full-scale fraud operation, and you're not his only target." That sentence sat in my mind like a heavy stone, pressing down with every heartbeat. Jack came over that afternoon with a manila folder thick with evidence. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Emily once did her homework, her hair tied in messy pigtails. Now, it held photographs, bank statements, copies of forged IDs, and a list of names other elderly people Mark had scammed. "He's been promising fake investment returns to retirees across 3 states, Jack explained. "And that Florida assisted living community? Doesn't exist. It's just an address to an empty warehouse." He slid a photo across the table showing a crumbling building with broken windows. I stared at it, feeling a cold anger rise in my chest. "Emily knows?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Jack sighed. "From what I can tell, she's been helping him. Signing documents, answering calls, acting as the concerned daughter. She may not know every detail of the scam, but she knows enough to make her guilty." I gripped the arms of my chair until my knuckles whitened. The betrayal wasn't just in the lies, it was in the fact that she chose him over me. My own child. I thought of Eleanor again, of the way she used to look at Emily with such pride. I wondered what she would think of her now. Jack laid out a plan. "We need more concrete proof before we can take this to the police. Audio, video, something undeniable. They're getting desperate. You're probably their last big score before they disappear. That's when they make mistakes. I agreed. It was dangerous, but I couldn't just wait for them to drain my accounts. I needed to see this through. The following week, I played my part to perfection. I invited Emily and Mark over for dinner. I cooked roast chicken and mashed potatoes, the kind of meal that made the house smell like family. They arrived right on time, Emily in a pale blue dress, Mark in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my car. During the meal, I mentioned that I'd been thinking more seriously about the Florida plan. Mark's eyes lit up, but he masked it quickly, pretending to cut into his chicken with casual indifference. That's great to hear, Robert. We can get the paperwork ready this weekend. I nodded slowly, sipping my water. Maybe you should bring everything over tomorrow. That way we can just get it done here, no rush. What they didn't know was that Jack had already set up hidden microphones in the dining room and living room. My home was now a stage, and I intended to let them write their own downfall. The next day, Mark arrived alone. Emily had called earlier, saying she had errands to run. He brought a briefcase, sleek and black, and set it on the coffee table. Robert, I think you're making the right decision. This is going to be good for everyone. I sat back in my recliner, feigning a tired smile. I just want to make sure everything's in order. You know how I am about details. He chuckled. Of course. That's why I've handled all of them for you. He opened the briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. On top was a property transfer deed with my name neatly typed above a signature line. Below that, in smaller print, was the clause giving Mark full control of all proceeds from the sale. I took my time flipping through the pages, my hand steady even though my pulse thundered in my ears. Looks good, I murmured. But tell me again how this investment works? I want to be sure I understand. That was when Mark started really talking. He laid it all out like a man boasting about his genius. Offshore accounts, fake business fronts, shell companies. He even mentioned other elderly clients, bragging about how easily they signed things without reading them. Jack's voice echoed in my mind, get him talking, Robert. The more he says, the more we have. I nodded along, pretending to be impressed, asking questions that kept him going. All the while, every word was being recorded. Half an hour later, Emily arrived. She looked tense, her smile brittle. Dad, are we ready to sign? She sat beside Mark, her hand on his knee, eyes darting between me and the papers. I looked at her for a long moment before speaking. Emily, do you trust this man? She blinked, taken aback. Of course I do. He's my husband. And do you think I should trust him? I asked quietly. Her gaze faltered. Dad, this is for your own good. It was all I needed to hear. She wasn't going to stop him. She wasn't going to protect me. Jack had told me not to confront them yet, but my patience was wearing thin. I decided to push. If I sign this, what happens to my bank accounts? Mark didn't miss a beat. They'll be consolidated for the move. I'll handle the transfers personally to make sure nothing gets lost in the shuffle. That was it, the admission. My throat felt tight, but I forced myself to smile. All right. Let me just get a pen. I stood, walked to the kitchen, and pulled out my phone. I dialed Jack first, then 911. This is Robert Thompson, I told the operator. I have 2 people in my home attempting to commit financial fraud against me. They've brought forged documents. I have evidence. My voice didn't shake once. When I returned to the living room, both of them were still sitting there, waiting. I sat down, the pen in my hand, and looked Mark in the eye. You know, I've always believed in honesty. My wife used to say, you can't buy trust, you earn it. Before he could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. Officer Daniel Ortiz stepped inside, followed by Detective Laura Simmons. The moment Mark saw the badges, his face drained of color. Emily's hand slipped from his knee. Mr. Thompson? Detective Simmons asked. Yes, I said, handing her the stack of papers. This is what they brought me to sign. Everything you need to know is in there and on the recordings. Mark tried to stand, but Ortiz's hand on his shoulder kept him in place. Mark Hartman, you're under arrest for attempted wire fraud, elder financial abuse, and forgery, the officer recited. Emily's name followed shortly after, her charge being conspiracy. I sat back in my chair, feeling both heavy and strangely light at the same time. My daughter wouldn't look at me. She stared at the floor as they led her and Mark outside. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't say anything at all. The house felt eerily silent after the door closed behind Detective Laura Simmons and Officer Daniel Ortiz, taking Emily and Mark with them. I sat there for a moment, staring at the empty coffee cups on the table. Their fingerprints would be all over them evidence, just like the papers and the recordings. But what lingered most wasn't the satisfaction of catching them in the act. It was the image of Emily's face, pale and trembling, eyes fixed on the floor as if looking anywhere but at me could erase what she'd done. Jack arrived 20 minutes later, his long coat damp from a sudden rain outside. He looked around the room, taking in the open briefcase, the papers still on the coffee table. You did it, Robert, he said, his voice low, almost somber. You nailed them. I should have felt triumph, but what I felt was something far heavier. She's my daughter, Jack, I murmured. I keep trying to tell myself she was manipulated, but she handed me those papers herself. He pulled out a small recorder from his pocket. The DA is going to love this, he said, pressing play. Mark's voice filled the room, confident, arrogant, bragging about offshore accounts and fake assisted living centers. Emily's softer voice chimed in, urging me to sign. Every word was another nail in the coffin of any excuse I might have made for her. The trial moved quickly. Mark's operation wasn't just my nightmare, it was a web that stretched across state lines. Dozens of elderly victims came forward after his arrest. The FBI got involved, uncovering offshore accounts and millions in stolen funds. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for wire fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy. Emily's role was smaller but still criminal. She took a plea deal for 5 years probation, community service, and mandatory financial restitution. I attended every court session. Not because I wanted to see them suffer, but because I needed to hear the truth spoken out loud in a room where lies had consequences. I sat there as Judge Franklin Moore read the verdicts, as Mark's smugness finally cracked, as Emily kept her eyes fixed on the table. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a statement, I stood slowly, my knees aching, but my voice steady. I fought for this country, I began. I worked hard for every dollar I earned, for the home I built, for the family I raised. I never thought the person I needed to guard against would be my own daughter. Betrayal from strangers hurts. Betrayal from blood. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. It changes you forever. I don't know if I can forgive. But I do know this justice matters. And so does protecting those who can't protect themselves. When the gavel fell, I walked out into the cold Cleveland air feeling both emptied and freed. My accounts were restored, my home was safe, and the bank added security measures in my name at no cost. But there's no policy, no court order, that can patch the hole left by knowing your child would sell you out for money. The days after the trial were quiet. Too quiet. The house seemed bigger somehow, the rooms echoing in ways they hadn't before. I realized I needed something or someone to fill that silence. That's when I went to the animal shelter. The moment I saw him, I knew. A senior Labrador with a gray muzzle and wise, patient eyes sat in the back corner of the kennel, watching the world pass him by. His name was Buddy, and the shelter worker told me he'd been surrendered when his owner passed away. I brought him home that same day. Buddy followed me from room to room, his nails clicking softly on the hardwood floors, his presence grounding me in a way I hadn't felt since Eleanor was alive. At night, when the old ache of betrayal crept in, Buddy would curl up by my feet, his steady breathing a reminder that trust still existed somewhere. But I didn't just want to heal quietly. I wanted to do something with the anger, the loss, the lessons I'd learned. I contacted a local veterans support center, donating a portion of my restored funds to help those struggling with housing and financial security. I started speaking at community meetings and senior groups, telling my story not because I enjoyed reliving it, but because I knew there were others like me who might not see the warning signs until it was too late. Word spread. My story was picked up by a local newspaper, then a regional TV station. Soon, I was getting calls from people across the state, asking how to protect their elderly parents, how to check on suspicious financial moves, and how to handle legal documents safely. The conversations were raw, filled with fear and regret, but also with gratitude. I'd become, in a way, a shield for people who didn't yet realize they needed one. One evening, I sat on the porch with Buddy at my side, the sun setting in streaks of gold and pink across the sky. I thought about Emily. I hadn't spoken to her since the trial. She'd written once, a short letter saying she was sorry, that she'd been blinded by love and promises, that she wished she could undo it all. I kept the letter in a drawer, unread more than once. Forgiveness is a mountain I'm still at the base of, staring up at its steep, unforgiving slope. I know some people will say, she's your daughter, you have to forgive her. But I've learned that forgiveness isn't something you owe anyone. It's a choice you make when your heart is ready, and mine isn't there yet. Maybe it never will be. And that's alright. What I do know is that I've taken my pain and turned it into something that helps others. That, in itself, is a kind of victory. Buddy lifts his head, ears twitching at the sound of a car passing. I reach down and scratch behind his ears, grateful for his quiet loyalty. If people you protect, the truths you tell, and the courage you show when it would be easier to look away. So to anyone listening, I'll say this, don't be afraid to ask questions, to double-check the fine print, to protect what you've built. And never, ever assume that family ties are stronger than temptation. Moral lesson. Trust is a fragile thing once broken, it can't always be repaired. In my story, love for my daughter clouded my judgment, but caution kept me from losing everything. Betrayal from within the family cuts the deepest because it shatters not just your security, but your belief in the people you thought would stand by you. The truth is, protecting yourself is not an act of mistrust, it's an act of self-respect. If you or someone you know is a senior, be vigilant. Read every document, question every transaction, and never sign under pressure. Seek legal advice when in doubt. And if you suspect foul play, gather evidence before acting. Silence and patience can be your strongest weapons. Even after the storm, healing is possible. Whether it's through companionship, community service, or advocacy, you can reclaim your sense of purpose. Pain can turn into power when you choose to use your experience to protect others. Hello guys, if this story touched you, please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to my channel for more powerful stories filled with revenge, justice, and moral lessons. And don't forget your dignity and safety are worth fighting for.